Alrighty, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today in our first program in celebration of Black History Month. And it is my pleasure to present our mother-son duo today, Dustin Dumas and Taylor Weeks. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak to our audience today and share not only the history of your ancestors, but kind of some of the research that went into that process. We all know that researching our African-American answers can be very, very difficult, given a lot of the lack of records that are out there. So it's always encouraging to hear these stories of people who have been able to not only find that information out, but also some of the true heroes in a sense, and looking at your ancestors who participated in the Civil War, which is fantastic. So first, I'd just like to do an introduction of our two speakers. Dustin Dumas is a speaker, author, television host, and producer. She is frequently invited to speak on family history research. She has been invited to present on her Civil War veteran grandfathers at many places, including the African American Civil War Museum in Washington, D.C. She has written several articles on her Civil War veteran ancestors for newspapers and journals. She grew up in Illinois, but has lived in several states and countries. She is a member of the Daughters of the Union Veterans of the Civil War and the Ladies of the Grand Army of the Republic. She has an MBA from the University of Texas at Austin, a certificate from WHU Koblenz School of Corporate Management in Koblenz, Germany, and a BS from the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. Her son, Taylor Weeks, is a high school student who holds leadership positions in several school clubs. He is a member of the Sons of Union Veterans. When he was initiated into the Lineage Society on December 13th, 2014, he was the youngest member of the Sons of Union Veterans in New Jersey. Taylor has attended many of these events with his mother and is looking forward to presenting on his third and fourth great-grandfathers who fought in the Civil War. Now, before we jump into the presentation, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over. First and foremost, we will be taking your questions at the end of the program, so please submit them at any time using the Q&A or the chat feature in the Zoom dashboard. Dustin has provided me a handout that has some of the links and resources that she used, and I will be sharing that in the chat once the presentation gets underway. There is a survey available at the end of the webinar, and if you have time, we ask that you please complete it. We always love hearing your feedback. This program is being recorded, so if you missed something or would like to view it later, a link to the recording will be shared with everybody who registered, so look for that in your email over the next few days. And if you want some more information on the North Grove School, which plays an important part in this history, you can visit the Wikipedia entry that's on the screen there, and they have done a very good job of kind of keeping their history alive and vibrant. And one last thing, I just want to do a brief overview of the Zoom dashboard. This is what your dashboard should look like if you're using a PC or a Mac. If you're using a mobile device, the dashboard may look a little bit different, but all of the features will still be there. In the bottom left-hand corner, you have your audio settings. So you can check if you're using an external listening device like a headset or earbuds to make sure that it's connected properly there. At any point during the presentation, if you have any problems, there is a raise hand button here. You can click on that. That'll alert me, and I will send you a message in Zoom and hopefully be able to solve your problems. And as I mentioned before, if you want to contribute a question or a comment or add to the conversation, you can use the Q&A or the chat buttons. That is everything that I have for you. So it is my pleasure now to turn it over to Dustin and Taylor.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. And thank you for inviting us to come and speak on our grandfather.
Yeah, thank you very much.
If you can share the screen, then we can get started, unless I can do it myself. Let's see. Can I do it myself? Okay. So
that
everyone,
looks good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I didn't realize I could share. So as Andrew stated, the reason, we wanted to present is not just to present about our Civil War veteran grandfather, but also to give everyone background as to how we actually went about the process of finding the information, and also to give people resources as to how you can actually do some of your own family history. So I'm going to get right in and talk about, his name is Henry Beard. He's my he's my paternal second great grandfather. He fought for the Union during the Civil War. He was born in 1841 in Nashville, Tennessee. And just to get right into the different resources, because I will refer to them later in the actual presentation. But the one thing that's the easiest that you can do, and something that is probably most available to everyone, is your family. So I didn't know about this grandfather until just a few years ago. And this was because he was someone that we did not even know about, or at least my generation did not know about until very recently. And that is in large part due to the North Grove School, which I'll talk about later. So if you're able to ask family members about, especially I always think, if you go back to the oldest relative you have and start asking questions, and everyone pretty much has some kind of recording device, whether it's on your phone or if you just have like an old school like tape recorder or something like that, you have a way to actually have this information and document it and archive it. That would be great. The other tools used were Ancestry.com, which is a subscription-based database for families. Fold 3 is part of Ancestry. So that is specifically for military. So if you have someone you think may have fought in one of the wars, Civil War, Korean, Vietnam War, or any of the other wars, then you can probably find information on there. Newspaper.com was very useful because, part of doing this presentation is not just to tell you like, okay, this particular ancestor was born on this date and died on this date, and there are a few little tidbits. But it was important for me as someone who's interested in family history to get to know the people and not just place markers on a family tree. So the newspapers were quite interesting because if you go back during that era, they had things such as, hey, Sally Mae is having a dinner for her relatives, from 2 towns over. So it gives you a little bit more flavor in that sense. County records are also very important, as I'll mention later, because they have birth, death, and marriage licenses, which are very important. And the local genealogical and historical societies were very important in this particular ancestor because they had like a wealth of information. So if that's available to you, I would definitely use that. And last but not least is the National Archives and Records Administration. And they have general information. It doesn't have to specifically be about a military veteran. It could be about anybody in your family who would be in the archives. So the next slide is, I wanted to give you an idea of our family tree. So this is the paternal side. Taylor's down here, I'm here. These are my parents, and these are the only grandparents that I grew up with, Gladys Dumas and Herschel Dumas. So these other sets of grandparents, William Allen and Inez Allen and Henry Beard and Judy Beard, obviously I didn't know them, but through all of this family research, I was able to find them. So I always acknowledge my parents when I do these presentations, because if it had not been for my mother, if it had not been for my mother, I would not really have this passion for family history. She had done family history for decades before there was an Ancestry.com, before there was internet that was accessible for finding family history. One vivid example I can give you as to how dedicated she was. I grew up in the Chicago area, and on a trip from Chicago to California, she made a point of having my dad stop in Salt Lake City because that is where they have the physical archives, and especially for Black people, because they documented everyone regardless of their status. So this was before the internet, and this is before they digitized things. So this would, we spent a few days there just going through and by we, my mother, going through those records, because otherwise she would not have access to them. So I'll let Taylor take over from here.
Yeah, absolutely. So Henry Beard, my third great grandfather, was enslaved in Springfield, Tennessee, which is the red county highlighted on the map up on the top of Tennessee, close to Kentucky. And it's actually close to his birthplace, Nashville, which is adjacent to Springfield. And it is the county that's slightly down and to the right, touching Springfield. So that was all before the Civil War. But now moving on to a time during the Civil War, Henry Beard's escape route was, here we go. This is Henry Beard's escape route, which was moving forward in time. And he escaped from slavery to join the Union Army. But you can see that this wasn't easy from this map, as it was roughly 35 miles away, given an optimal route. So in modern day, this would have taken around 11 to 12 hours under good circumstances. But this is where it's important to note a few things. So modern day travel, even on foot, is significantly different from past travel. He wouldn't have been able to walk on sidewalks or roads as he would have now, as he was trying to avoid slave catchers and the dogs that they use. So he also wouldn't have been able to take anywhere near as optimal a path as the one shown on Google Maps, as the area surrounding Nashville has become a lot more built up in the past years, meaning forest has been removed and more roads and sidewalks have been added. So with this larger forested area, he either would have had to have trekked through it or gone around it, creating a less optimal and slower path. There also could have been inclement weather, and especially the clothing was significantly less durable and protective when dealing with this weather. And even shoes were not as durable, which would have been especially important when walking this distance. So essentially, this map in front of you is the best possible and most optimal route under good circumstances. So when you take a look at the time and the distance, just keep those things in mind. So next, moving on to the muster card. Muster cards are essentially roll cards within the Army. And the most important part about them is that they record a soldier's status and where they are on a specific date. And by status, I mean that can range from being injured in the hospital to being sick or to being completely unavailable to continue with their duties at war. And also what's important about these muster cards is that during the role in which the muster cards were recorded, that time was also the time in which soldiers were paid. So now this muster card is evidently very difficult to read. So here are the important parts of it. So the most important part is that it has the mustered in and mustered out date. So Henry Beard mustered in on August 6th, 1863, and mustered out in June 7th, 1865. Which is pretty funny because June 7th happens to be my birthday, which is a pretty interesting coincidence. And it's actually a coincidence that happens again, as you'll see later that on June 7th, Henry Beard actually married Judy Jones. So Henry Beard was in the 105th Illinois Infantry, which was the easiest thing to read on the original muster card because it was actually printed on the muster card, as the muster cards were specific to that 105th Illinois Infantry. He was on the Union side, which he had escaped to, as previously shown, and in Company A. And throughout his entire time in the Civil War, he was an undercook. He came in as an undercook and left as an undercook. So an undercook, this picture shows the duties of an undercook, which is essentially just a cook within the Union Army. So even though Henry Beard came in as an undercook and left as an undercook, he came in as a general standard undercook, but actually left as an undercook that was specifically responsible for the commander's food. And moving on to a little tidbit about the National Park Service website. So the National Park Service website actually has Henry Beard's information online. So you could go to the website right now and find this information. And this right here is the same information that was previously shown on the muster card and the slide that made the muster card easier to read. So they have it in an easy to read format, which is really important if you or someone you know wants to go and do research on a military veteran, because the National Park Service can be a great tool for figuring out when they were in the Army and what happened to them.
Yeah. So thank you for that. I also want to point out one other thing. Down here, you'll see the alternate name. This is information that you can actually take to the National Archives and Records Administration, and this will give you more details on this particular soldier, on the soldier that you have the information for. Well, thank you, Taylor. So this gets me to this, gets us to the part of the presentation that this is one of two pieces of information that are the most important as far as I'm concerned. And this is an affidavit from Henry Beard to the U.S. government. The reason this affidavit was filed was because he was trying to get his pension money. Because he was an enslaved person, he did not have a birth certificate, and that was required. So because he did not have a birth certificate, he had to get affidavits from other people who fought with him or who were in the military with him. And in this case, this is the only document I have that is actually in his own words. And the only reason I have this is that I had to file several Freedom of Information Act requests. And that is because this information was not at the National Archives in DC. So they referred me to the archives in St. Louis. It wasn't there, but I knew there was information. So I had to file this FOIA. So the reason why this is so important is because it gives me so much information about him that I could only speculate about. So, for example, the plantation on which he lived, the people who owned him, who enslaved him, rather, the name of his parents, and in this case, the person who enslaved him was the daughter of the larger family. So she was 2 years older than him. He was about 21 and he was 23. And so I was able to get all of this information. And this information is nowhere else on any other government document. So this is very valuable. The next person I want to, again, as I was explaining it in the beginning of the presentation, it's not just a matter of putting names on a chart and saying, okay, this person was married to that person and they had these children. But it was also important to me to understand the person, how they lived and where they lived. So Judy Jones is my second great grandfather. She married Henry Beard. And what's important about her story is that she was actually enslaved in Texas. And because of there are articles about her from the town of Sycamore, which is where they ended up living in Illinois. I was able to find out that, for example, just lots of information, but for example, one thing that struck me was that she did not have shoes during the entire time that she was enslaved. It was only on her way out of Texas that she was able to get her first pair of shoes, and she was about 12 at that time. But again, as I was mentioning before about newspaper.com and just like different historical societies, it's so important to lean on them because they have a wealth of information. I wanted to go, Taylor touched on this a little earlier, but the county records were able to provide me with this marriage license. And, I have it here and it looks great. And it's, it looks like, oh yeah, you just go to the county, you put the names in and it should not be a problem. However, this county had changed, it had changed names in a sense because they moved the borders. So I thought I was looking for their license in a specific county. And then because of subsequent changes in the border, it had changed. And so it took a little bit longer, but I finally got it. And as Taylor mentioned a little earlier, they were actually married on June 7th, which is his birthday. So, one of the important things about having the documents and the newspaper articles and things like that is that it provides something like this. It's very unusual to have an enslaved family in a newspaper. It's much more unusual to have pictures of them. So this is Henry Beard. This is Judy Jones. This is some of the 14 children that they had. And many of them died of consumption, which we know as tuberculosis, before they became adults or right as they were adults. So again, the reason I know this is because there were articles about their family. I mentioned that the affidavit was very important. That was one of two pieces of very important documents. This is the second one, and this is the parcel of land receipt of Henry Beard. He was sold 5 acres for $50 in 1873, and his family subsequently owned it for 50 years. The people that they bought it from, David and Lucinda West, were known abolitionists in Sycamore, Illinois. The reason why this why this document is so important to me, because it's very monumental in the sense that it goes from, this is a person who was property to now being able to own property. And that is, and fairly soon after he, was in the Civil War and escaped to go into the Civil War. And I think that's pretty, that's a very interesting thing to think about, how someone who just a few years earlier was someone's property is now able to own property. Just to give you an idea of where their property was in Sycamore, it was on the edge of town, the 5 acres. And one little thing that I thought was interesting is that David West, who sold him the property, had some kind of, for I think the first 5 years or so, he was still able to hunt on his land just as part of the sale. So this is where the actual property is today. Obviously, the house does not still stand there, but I was able to visit this area, which, by the way, I grew up probably 35, 40 minutes from there, knew nothing about this. It's still very rural land. And I was able to visit a few years ago, and this is where that property is. So the next part I want to talk about is the children. Again, I'd like to, give you a better flavor of what the entire family was doing. And as most of you probably know, enslaved people, by punishment of death or severe punishment, were not allowed to read or write or learn. So what I found interesting is that if you look at the census data, the top two this is Henry Beard and this is Judy Beard. They could not read or they could not write, but of course the third column here is, are they able to speak English? All of their children are enrolled in school at this point. So it just goes to show you that to Henry Beard and Judy Jones, education was so important that at the first opportunity, they made sure that their children were educated. So that gets me to the North Grove School. This school is a one-room schoolhouse that is located in Sycamore, Illinois. It still stands today. This is just from a few years ago. It's in the exact same place. As you can see, the outhouses are still over here. There's another one in this direction. And this is where the Beard children went to school. What's interesting about this school is that if I went back to the previous slide, I could have shown you that their neighbors on either side all around were Swedish immigrants. This school was built by Swedes, and as a consequence, this one-room schoolhouse was taught everything was taught in the school, but only in Swedish. So that meant that the Beard children had to learn Swedish in order to actually just go to school. And just to give you an idea of this is where they lived and this is where the school is. So you can see that they were within walking distance. Now, I wanted to give you an idea now of here are the children at various points during their stay in Sycamore. And you can see, here are the, different family members. And all of them are my family members because they were the first African-American family to actually integrate into Sycamore, Illinois, and also into the school. So it gives you an idea of what you can see the school still looks exactly the same. Here's another picture of them. These are other, I believe these, doesn't matter what the names are, but these are two more relatives. And this just shows you the continuity and how important it was to Henry and Judy Beard for their children to get this education. And as I mentioned, here's the outhouse on the other side. It still is there. The only thing that has changed is that they've added a little bit of a further front porch on the front of this building. And this is the last picture I will leave you with because this is Inez Beard. This is my great-great-grandmother. And these are two of her, this is Georgia and this is Minnie. These are her siblings. But, going back to what I spoke about a little earlier about having documentation, if their story and if the North Grove Schoolhouse story hadn't been important, I would have missed out on this picture. I would have missed out on the article. And that's just because someone thought it was interesting enough to show this school. And that's, like I said, that's all part of the research because it's not just a matter of to me anyway, it's not just a matter of trying to put as many names on a family tree chart, but it's also important to get a narrative of those same people. This is a short video I took of the schoolhouse when I was there. And this just gives you an idea of the type of learning conditions they would have been in. The desks are pretty much all original, except for a few that I believe they replaced with also typical desk of that day. They were very proud of these shades because these are the original shades that were in the schoolhouse, and they have been able to preserve them. So that was very important to them. They have tried to keep everything. So the North Grove Schoolhouse, the reason why it is so important to my family and also to Sycamore, to that area, is because they were going to raise it about 15 years ago. They went into the basement and they found these pictures of these school children, and they noticed that some of them were Black. They had no idea that there were any Black students who were in the one-room schoolhouse, especially that long ago. They did more research, and then they found out that it was the Beard family. As a consequence, they were able to apply to the National Historical Register, and a big part of that was the Henry Beard. This is part of the application. And as you can see here, they cite the Beard family as voluntarily integrating the schoolhouse. It's something that, it took federal troops to do, in the 1960s. They were doing it 80 years before. And also the importance of having a Civil War veteran in their community and whose children were also in the community. So they did this, and as a consequence, they were able to, the North Grove School on February 12th in 2011. So they were able to join the National Historical Register. And again, a big part of that is due to Henry Beard's family. So I happened to be in Sycamore just coincidentally when they were having a cemetery walk of prominent people in the area. There were about 6 people that they wanted to highlight. And coincidentally enough, the Henry Beard was part of that walk. There were probably 6 people that they highlighted. And this is because he was a Civil War veteran in the community. So I'll let Taylor take over here.
Yeah, so great. This is a presidential recognition certificate, specifically from Barack Obama. And a presidential recognition certificate essentially gives official government recognition to someone that served in the military. So to get one of these, you have to prove that the person, in this case, Henry Beard, was in the military through giving documents about their time in the military. So we applied for this certificate and received it for his service for the country during the Civil War.
Yes. So going back to making sure, like if you're doing your family history and you want to make sure that you can find different parts of the history that you may not know about, this is the entire, I showed you the picture earlier, but this is the article that accompanied it. And the reason why they were so interested in it is that, this was many years later, and they didn't realize that they had a Civil War veteran who lived among them. They didn't know the history of the Beard family. And so this is one way of recognizing them. But it also helped me because this is something that I was able to add to my presentation and just general knowledge. I mean, I would not have known this necessarily. And there are many articles. Obviously, I didn't want to put all of them in the presentation, but I wanted to show people that newspaper.com, historical societies, they're a wealth of information. And so part of continuing that legacy of making sure that different generations have access to these different, to the history is I actually wrote this article based off of all of the information that I had gathered. So 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, somebody else, another family relative will be able to find this article, which expands on that article. And of course, I continue to do presentations like this just so that there is one, so that other people will be encouraged to find out their family history, but also know that, a large part of continuing this family history lays with individual people, the current people who are able to write the articles, do the presentations, do the research, and have it in a way so that the future generations have access to them. And this was something that I did locally. So that was a presentation on my second great grandfather and Taylor's third great grandfather, Henry Beard. And Andrew, I will turn it back over to you to see if anyone has any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Dustin and Taylor. I know we kind of did a practice run before, but it's still fascinating watching you do this and just learning all about not only your family, but the whole process behind it. And it seemed like it was a little more labor intensive than, than some other things. So it seems like perseverance is key.
Yes. Yes, it is.
So,
Yes, definitely.
all right. Well, if people do have any questions, please feel free to submit them using the chat or the Q&A function, and we'll be happy to address them. The first thing I want to post in the chat, one of our audience members let me know that newspapers.com is running a special for free lookups this weekend, and so you can do it at the address on the in the chat there. So thank you, Emily, for letting us know about that.
Great.
All right, now let's see. How much info do you need when starting your search?
So I would say you just need, if family members are available, that's all you need, because this Henry Beard, I did not know anything about. And the reason this came about is that my mother's, because she did a lot of the family history on her side, that side of the family was very well researched. And so as often happens, especially with enslaved people, you get to, a brick wall and you're like, okay, I just have to take a break. And so I started asking on my paternal side, like, okay, how far back do you know? Or, do you know of any family members? And Henry Beard came up, and it just came up very nonchalantly. My aunt was telling me that, oh yeah, we went to a presentation that they had at the North Road School, and and I was like, wait, who is this person? So that's all I needed, and I opened up an entirely new path of family on that side. So that's what you need as far as to get started. One thing I wanted to mention with newspaper, ancestry, Fold 3, many times your local libraries will actually have them. So it's not even, and it's not necessarily an expense that you have to accrue as far as trying to do family history. So I hope that answered the question.
We had a comment, so amazing that this was found at the St. Louis Archives, especially after the fire in the 70s. Was this something that was just misfiled? Do you know that they had to go to maybe another location to get that it wasn't actually there?
That's interesting. I don't know the answer to that. All I know is that I was working with someone at the National Archives in DC, and he said it wasn't there, but it had to be in St. Louis. He was someone who had been at the archives for decades, and he knew everything. So when he told me it had to be there, and after I contacted St. Louis and they said, nope, don't have it, then I believe he was the one who suggested that I file a FOIA request. And then all of a sudden and by the way, this took many years. I had to keep asking St. Louis. But I finally got the information. And that one document, the affidavit, that is just one document out of many. And so I don't know where it was in St. Louis. I don't know if it was offsite, but I was able to get the information.
When looking at the photographs, the black and white students weren't intermingled together. Is there any way of knowing if they sat together in the classroom or were they separated?
You know what? So I should back up a little bit and tell you that the person who took me on the North Grove, took me to the school, because I was just there. I happened to be there and I was going to be in town. And I contacted somebody from the Historical Society and I said, oh, would it be okay if I stop by and take pictures? Because it's not open to the public. It's only open for special events. She went one step further and she took me in, and that's why I have all the footage of inside. She took me to the area. So the other pictures that I've seen, I'm not sure if I would assume that they were all together. And that's only based on the photos that I've seen of them taking the class pictures, because as you can see, the family, they didn't have only the Black students on this side, but they were intermingled. The other interesting thing is that the person who actually took me on the tour, she's also a descendant of that school, because her great aunt or great great aunt was actually a teacher. So we were, sort of joking that, we were looking at these pictures because, again, these are just a few of the pictures that they have. We were joking that it was just sort of funny that, now it's so many years later, and still two of the descendants of these photos are still here and curious about this information. So to answer your question, I don't know whether or not they were separated, but I believe I suspect that they were probably integrated in the classroom.
All right. Another comment that they noticed that Henry escaped from slavery by walking south to Nashville, which in 1863 was already occupied by the Union armies. Was there anything in his affidavit or anything else that kind of described how he fled or anything?
No, there was not anything that described other than on the sheet of paper. It just basically said that he had found out through other people that the Union was stationed in Gallatin. And that's when he fled. It didn't give any more descriptive information, because the point of that affidavit was just for him to receive his pension, because he was being denied because he did not have a birth certificate. So there were affidavits from other people saying yes, he did, he was with our regiment.
I don't see any more questions right now, but do you have any tips? Somebody made a comment that it feels like it was so easy for you because all this documentation was out there. You just kind of had to go find it. But what about, the people who run into constant roadblocks, that there just isn't the documentation? What kind of advice or what kind of tricks do you have that they might be able to use?
Let me be very clear. We're just making it look easy. because this has taken years, like years and years and years. The easiest part was talking to my aunt, who just nonchalantly said, "Oh yeah, did you know about this?" I'm like, "No, I don't." But everything else, I mean, I live on the East Coast, so this took traveling back to Illinois, getting the photos, finding out more things. So it was not easy. But to more succinctly answer your question, if there are roadblocks, if you have if you have organizations in your family historian or genealogical organizations in your area, I would definitely join them, because there are people who are very ready to help you because they've gone through the same things as maybe you're going through as far as roadblocks. Libraries are wonderful resources, because not only would they have the databases, but the librarians, the reference librarians are available to help. Currently, I'm working with the local reference library of my town to try and get an article back from the same grandparents that my grandparents, not great or great, to get an article that was in the paper. So the libraries are a good resource. Local genealogical societies are a good source. Local historical societies, and of course your family. But out of all of those, I would say contact the library, because they could also point you to the genealogical and historical societies.
Yeah, and I think also to speak a little bit on the difficulty of this entire process, we've done some research on my dad's side of the family, and I think within, I would say, about a month, we were able to go farther back because all of the documentation was there and all of the trees were easy to line up, and the relatives all had names that were documented well and not changed and misspelled, and it's been a very difficult process throughout this this side of my family's genealogy.
Mm-hmm.
Were your people able to pass as white?
You know what's interesting is no, I don't think so. But what I find interesting is that my grandmother, on her birth certificate, it says white. She looked like me, so she could not pass. You know what I mean? So I think there was a lot of mislabeling. If there were factions of my family that may have passed as white, I don't know of them. I've never heard of any of those stories. But I'm not aware of that.
Alrighty, well, I don't see any more questions.
Okay.
So I think we can go ahead and end it there. And just a reminder, this was being recorded. It will be sent to everybody who registered. I'll also include your email address, Dustin, in case anybody wants to get in contact with you,
Sure.
if they think of anything else. So I'd like to extend our thanks at the library for being part of our Black History Month celebration, and really providing a very powerful and an insightful story. So
Thank you so much for having us. We appreciate being here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome. And again, thank you everybody for attending. We hope you found it as enjoyable as I did. Enjoy the long weekend, and we'll see you all soon.